What's up everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about the Way of Weight 11. This beautiful sunrise colorway just arrived yesterday, so I got the idea to take out my older pairs, some of them you can see right here, and compare them to how they hold up against a brand new pair like this one right here. There's actually one more pair that I want to show off specifically for this video because it's been used the most and the longest, but we're going to get to that a little bit later in the video. First up, the retail price, that hasn't changed since the initial release in October of 2024. I've been hooping in my pairs for almost that long. I just had to wait for my size 14 to release for a little bit, but then I got them and I've been using them ever since. So it's going to be a nice couple of months span that we're going to compare them and see how they hold up. And as I said, the retail price hasn't changed. 225 euros or dollars is an insanely high retail price, but you do get a really top-notch performance basketball shoe. Speaking of performance, let's dive straight into it and start with the traction performance. Outsole design of the Way of Weight 11 is one of my favorite things of the shoe. Not only does it perform great, it also looks great. You can see a lot of details from Dwayne Wade's career and just some really cool design features on there. And it also performs well. But before we talk about performance, what is it actually? It's a GCU outsole, which stands for Ground Control Unit. It's something we've seen on the All City 12 Encore already that released before this shoe, and also something they carried on to the All City 13. Although there it's not full length anymore, here we really have full length GCU, and it performs extremely well on clean indoor courts. It does struggle a little bit with dust pickup. So let's say, for example, I'm going to take up my older pair here. You won't see as much dust on here because I do clean them from time to time, especially the outsoles. I get a lot of questions about how I clean my shoes. Usually I just focus on the outsole because that's the most important thing in my opinion. But as you can see, that there's a little bit of dirt stuck in between. The grooves are not very thick. They're actually kind of shallow. So that's probably a reason why dust gets stuck in there quite easily. That was a tongue breaker. And I also used this pair outdoors. You can see a little bit of the discoloration. And of course, here you can see it a little bit better. They don't look like I used them for a crazy amount of time outdoors. And probably you're thinking, if I've been using this pair for 5 months, why is it still in such good condition? Well, because I have so many shoes, I just rotate a lot, but I still wear them a good amount of times. And for the durability, you can definitely take them outdoors. At first I was very skeptical, and also this little thing right here up front happened, I'd say probably the second time I was wearing them. So I thought, oh my god, this is definitely not a shoe I would take outdoors. But actually, that's pretty much the only flaw, and that happened only on this pair. All my other pairs didn't have that issue here in the front. And maybe it's just a material or quality issue on this specific pair, because I haven't seen it happen on too many other pairs. And when I took them outdoors, they actually held up pretty well. So you can see the pattern is still looking good. There's no areas where it's completely gone, so you can definitely go with them and hoop outdoors. Another reason why they're actually great for outdoors is cushioning setup, and to compare that, we have a full-length Boom midsole similar to the Way of Weight 10, which by the way you can see right here. And just for a quick comparison on the outsole pattern, it looks very different here. So it's not a GCU, it's the traditional tough OS rubber, which also worked very well. So if you're thinking about the Way of Weight 10 for outdoors, that also works. Now back to the cushioning setup. It's still Boom, but it doesn't look like it looked on the Way of Weight 10 anymore. It's a little bit thicker as well. So let's focus on here for a moment, a nice close-up of the midsole. As you can see, there's not really that many compression lines because we've got it encapsulated in a lot of foam. Here on the lateral side, you can see it a little bit better, especially here in the forefoot area. And now if I take a brand new pair, you're going to see it looks very similar. I've only had this pair on foot for like maybe 10 minutes in my flat, trying to break them in a little bit. I'm going to wear them on court for the first time after I record this video. And what makes the cushioning setup so special is that it's a carbon core system, which means we've got a layer of Boom foam right here. Then we've got a full-length carbon plate in between, and then we've got another layer of Boom foam before we get to the GCU outsole. And it's not as bouncy as the Way of Weight 10 was, because I showed you the outsole before. You can see the carbon plate here. That was one of the bounciest shoes I've tried ever. So these are not as bouncy anymore. You still get a good amount of spring back out of them, but just not as much bounce, like straight up propulsion from the floor. But they have better impact protection throughout, especially in the forefoot, and in the heel, you're really soft, really plush. Stepping comfort is also nice. The insole is nothing all too special, but there's a nice stroll board like we usually see it with Way of Weight underneath. And the cushioning setup is also something that really doesn't bottom out. I've noticed it on all my pairs. It's still almost as good as brand new. Of course, you can feel it a little bit. It also doesn't really need a lot of break-in time. In my opinion, these are great right out of the box and they will hold up over time very, very well, just simply because this layer of boom foam is so thick. It's very hard to wear it through, and that's also the reason why I said at the beginning of the cushioning setup, it's a great shoe for outdoors. Not only do you have a durable outsole, but you also have great impact protection, especially if you're playing on concrete courts. It's important that you get a lot of cushioning underneath your foot because otherwise your knees are gonna be mad at you after you're done hooping. Now moving on to the support features, I mentioned the carbon core system already. That's also consistent throughout all colorways. We also have a TPU heel counter in a very, very special design featuring some of Dwayne Wade's accolades throughout his career. You can see the Larry O'Brien trophy, for example, and it also does a very good job. As you can see, it goes all the way from the lateral side to the medial side, so it hugs around your heel very nicely. And just by looking at the shoe, trying to bend them, flex test, the forefoot flexes very nicely just here in the toe area where your foot also flexes naturally, but the midfoot is perfectly stable. So it's definitely one of the most supportive shoes I've ever had on foot. Also laterally, you are good to go. And that's just nice that this shoe holds up so well in those categories, not only for cushioning, but also for support. Here's the brand new pair. For comparison, you can see they flex here, even a little bit less maybe. So that maybe takes some breaking time. And laterally, you're also perfectly stable. This lacing system actually also does a very good job of keeping you in place, holds your foot on the footbed nicely. And of course, those little design features kind of going all the way from this TPU heel counter here into the midfoot area also act a little bit like an outrigger on the lateral side of your foot and keep your foot here on the footbed. What's also nice is you can see already the outsole is extremely wide and we actually have an actual outrigger as well. You can probably see it a little bit better by looking at it from the top. Here it stands out a little bit, so you really are perfectly stable if you have them on foot. And as I said already at the start of the support category, it's one of the most supportive shoes I've ever tried. Now for the last performance category, we're going to talk about the materials, and you probably guessed it already. This is an area where we're going to spend a lot of time because we have a lot of different material setups. Just by comparing these two pairs, you can see it already. This is the initial colorway they released. This is one of the newest colorways that came out. And here we have a fabric or like a synthetic upper right here, kind of like a textile mesh-like fuse or whatever you want to call it. And then we have some other accents here in the back. Here we have a synthetic leather upper in the forefoot and those same accents in the back. And then on my other two pairs that I have, we also have, this one is actually full leather. I'm not a big fan of that anymore, or actually never was a totally big fan. I love the colorway, but I've been on a vegan diet for 2 years and now I'm also trying to implement that in my shoes or in my clothing. So I'm not going to review shoes with leather anymore from this point forward, just so you guys know that as well. So as I said, this one has leather. That's also the reason why I haven't been playing in this one as much, just because I don't like having the skin of that animal on my foot. And this one is all synthetic. That's great. That's exactly how I like it actually. We also have this kind of fabric-like upper in the forefoot right here. It's very soft, breaks in nicely. And then we have some synthetic leather accents here in the heel area, just like on those other two pairs that I just mentioned. The tongue is actually nice and soft. It looks like it has more padding than it actually has. So it's soft, but here, especially if the more downwards you go, the softer or the thinner it gets, my bad. So it's not to the point where the lace is cut into your feet, but it's also not a crazy padded tongue. If you're used to something like that, maybe on the KD17, they have a lot of padding there. So it's not as soft here. It's nice and cozy, but nothing too special, nothing extra plush. The Kai 1 would also be a good example of excess amount of padding. We do have a lot of padding in the heel area, which is nice. I'm going to put some close-ups on screen so that you can see that better. Here we've got like, I think 3 pillows in the heel area. I had no issues with that pressing against my feet whatsoever. The tongue also has some ventilation holes, which is nice because the rest of the material is not very breathable, especially on this leather colorway and especially on the synthetic leather colorway that I showed you before, the Sunrise colorway. Here, I would say breathability is probably the best, where we have this little mesh or fabric in the forefoot. And the materials do a good job in keeping your foot on the footboard as well. It's also important. Materials are also important for support. And overall, they also break in relatively quickly and without too much pain in any area where I wouldn't notice any pinching where I would roll my feet or something like that. There was no excess amount of dead space. That's also the last thing we're going to talk about is the fit of the shoe. It's a little bit tricky because they are very wide in the toe box, but a little bit narrow at first in the midfoot, especially right here, which is exactly where my foot is wide. So that's a little bit hard for me at first. It takes some time to break them in. It does hurt a little bit for sure at first, but it's a way wider and way better fit in my opinion than something like the AC12 Encore. That was a shoe that released right before this one, for example. With that being said, that's pretty much all I have for you today on the Way of Weight 11 and how they held up over time. Now, before we move on, the materials actually also hold up quite well. I did show you that little part on the White Hot colorway where we have had the issue here in the forefoot. That was kind of the outsole coming up onto the materials where it just peeled off very easily. I haven't noticed it on any other colorways. I even played with the White Hot outdoors and didn't notice any more issues with that. And I also think that this fabric material actually does quite a good job of holding up because we have a little toe guard right here. If you're a toe dragger, you should be good in any case, even if you do decide to take these outdoors. With that being said, that's all I have for you today on how the Way of Weight 11 holds up after a couple of months playing in them, and simultaneously also giving you a performance review of the Sunrise colorway because they perform just as good as all the other colorways, as they have essentially almost the same tech. If you have any other questions, just comment down below. Also let me know your thoughts on the Way of Weight 11. Do you like them? Have you played with them? Are you a bigger fan of the 10s maybe? I would say overall, I still like the 10s a tiny little bit more, just because they were one of the most iconic, maybe even the most iconic or the best basketball shoe of all time, and was one of the first Way of Weight shoes I tried, so they just kind of burned into my mind as this all-time great basketball shoe. But the Way of Weight 11 for sure excels in some other categories, but maybe isn't as good in something like bounce or traction performance on dusty courts. With that being said, now for real, that's all I have for you today. Have a good one and see you next time.